some time out of your busy schedule to be with us for this very important conversation. My name is Jason Lane, and I have the great privilege of being the Dean of the School of Education at the University at Albany. The School of Education was founded in 1844. It is New York's oldest public teachers college, and since that, for more than 175 years, we have been committed to making sure that we can support teachers and leaders in our schools in the Albany region and beyond. And we're thrilled to be able to host these weekly community conversations with school leaders, practitioners, and scholars from across the country to really tackle some of the most critical issues facing education, particularly as we are dealing with the new normal that has been brought to us both by the dual pandemics of COVID-19 and what we're dealing with Black Lives Matter and equity in our schools. So thank you again for being here. Next slide. So I just did that, but let me just say as background, that was my daughter who came in to say hi. She always loves entering these things. So again, part of the new normal we're in with COVID-19. Back in March, when we first went remote, one of the things we did as School of Education in collaboration with our K-12 partners was to create a new website called remoteed.org, in part to leverage what has been the School of Education's longstanding excellence in online education to help others move into this remote and online delivery format. On that website, you can find more than 1,500 curated educational resources for students organized by grade level and by subject matter. This is geared for parents and for teachers to be able to help navigate this space and to support their students in their learning journeys. That is being supported by the Academy for the Advancement of Teaching, Leadership, and Schools, which is hosted here at the University of Albany, and that is part of our professional development arm. As part of that, also, for those who are interested, as part of the session, you can receive a CTLE credit for being part of the community conversation today. And to do that, get a hold of Atlas or to reach out to Jerry Rivera-Wilson directly. And I'm sure I'm jumping ahead here, Jerry. So this month on Community Conversations, as I mentioned earlier, we have, this is a weekly program, free and open to the public, and we hope that you'll join us for some of our future sessions. Today, of course, we are looking at the new normal and supporting English language learners for success. Next week, we will be looking at esports and how esports are coming into fashion in both K-12 and the higher education industry. That's something I think is particularly critical as we have had to suspend many of our traditional athletic ventures. Esports is an important alternative, and so we'll be looking at what's happening in the esports world. And then on September 30th, we will be looking at issues for grading for equity and how do we think about that in the K-12 school setting. Obviously something very important to us right now. So hope you'll be able to join us for those, and would encourage you to register for them. Again, I mentioned the CTLE credit. You can see a little bit more here, but you can find out more by getting hold of Jerry Rivera-Wilson, and there is her email address at the end, and I'm sure she can put it in the text box later as well, so you can get to it. Now, let me just jump in to the focus today, and I am thrilled to introduce the lead panelist, and I will turn it to her in a moment. Gladys Cruz is a real leader of K-12 in the Capital Region and across New York State. She's a dear friend of ours. Delighted to work with her on a regular basis. She has been a champion for equity, diversity, and inclusion for all of our students, and making sure that all of our students have equal access to education and that they have a successful learning journey while they're in our K-12 schools. She's currently the superintendent of the Questar 3 BOCES, representing the districts across the Hudson River from the Capital District. And without further ado, let me turn it over to my friend and colleague, Dr. Gladys Cruz.
Thank you. Thank you for having this most important conversation around the new normal and educating ELLs. I'm looking forward to joining in the conversation, answering any questions. As some of you may know, I started my career as a teacher of English language learners, and that was in Puerto Rico a few decades ago. And then I came to the Capital Region, to UAlbany, with a fellowship to pursue my PhD at UAlbany, and I am a proud recipient of the PhD in curriculum instruction from the Education Theory and Practice department. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much. And my name is Carmen Diaz. I am the interim director of the RBERN, which is the Regional Bilingual Education Resource Network. And we are the Capital District RBERN, so we are part of the Questar 3 family. And I would love to introduce the other colleagues on the call here, but I'm so grateful to UAlbany and Dr. Rivera-Wilson for connecting us and enabling this to happen today. So thank you so much for having us. So I'll take a moment to introduce Ross Garmil. He is the Supervisor of Educational Programs at the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages. Ross?
Hi, thank you everyone. I'm really looking forward to this being in the state. There's nothing better for us to know what's important to be working on than to be speaking with people that are actually out in the field. So I'm really looking forward to your questions, and hopefully we have answers and have already thought of a lot of them, and anything that we haven't, we'll be able to take back and address as soon as possible. So thank you.
Thanks, Ross. And also with us today, we have David Mumper. He is the resource specialist at Hudson Valley RBERN, and we're kind of taking advantage of this virtual world here, being able to connect so far across the state. So David, hello.
Hi, good afternoon or good evening. Can you guys all hear me well through the audio feed? Great.
Yes.
Yes, I'm David Mumper. I'm one of the resource specialists at the Hudson Valley RBERN, which is the RBERN that serves the region directly south of the capital region, essentially anything from New York City almost up to Albany. I've been with the RBERN for 5 years now in our second cycle of the grant. My specialty, and in fact, I think I have always been, at least in New York State, as far as certified teaching goes, a teacher of ELLs. I was an English teacher, but always from the beginning in a co-taught ENL environment. And I'm now also in our CUNY system at the CUNY Graduate Center working on my doctorate in essentially multicultural education, culturally responsive education, and immigrant students in New York. And before we go, I just want to say that, you know, no one's got this all figured out. Nobody's perfect. But of all times right now, man, what a privilege it is to work and live in New York State of all places, and to have a conversation like this about our ELLs. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. So if we could go to the next slide, I think we'll jump right into our questions. So we have 5 questions for today, and I'll jump to our panelists. So the first question is, under normal non-COVID circumstances, what does supporting ELLs, or English language learners, in the beginning of the academic year look like? And I think we'll start with Dr. Cruz.
So under normal non-COVID circumstances, we would be welcoming our students into our classrooms. We would be probably doing some activities with them to learn about them, to learn about what they did during the summer, what they did during their vacation, but that's all changed. So, you know, unfortunately, you know, I think I'm just going to say 2 words that I think really summarize where we need to go, and that is we need to take care of Maslow before Bloom. We really need to take care of the social emotional issues that our children may bring to the classroom, whether it's remote, whether it's in person, or whether it's a hybrid, before we can really get into the academics. Our children, our adults, everyone has suffered traumatic experience with this pandemic, and we really need to support everyone's social, emotional well-being.
Thank you so much. I wholeheartedly agree with you. And Mr. Garmil.
So, you know, my focus would be more on the identification process for new students, ensuring that everyone is placed in the appropriate classrooms for their proficiency levels from, normally you would be this year, somewhere in the spring, getting your students' updated proficiency levels from the 2020 NYSESLAT, and making those assignments. Also, later in the fall, you would be receiving the accountability scores to see. So we would be, working with that and really thinking about just, what I consider to be more business as usual in the policy end of having the students. One other thing that I think is really crucial and is for the placement for co-teachers to be provided a schedule so that they can plan together. They can discuss their students and not just understanding the lesson, but really having time with each other to make sure that they're on the same page throughout and starting the year. And I think some of those really do, as much as possible, though, regardless, we're going to have this kind of wacky different set of instruction, different ways of instruction for students within the same class. I think that planning, I think that work on the teachers and the ability for everybody to step back and really try to understand what your classroom is going to be like, what your students are going to need, whether or not it's what you had expected if they don't have a score and you're not sure where they're going to be. I think that's crucial for administrators to be giving teachers the time to really figure out what's going on with their classroom, what's going on with their students. The other thing that with COVID is different is we've been promoting as an office for districts and schools to create or adopt your own type of progress monitoring for students. Since there is no NYSETEL score, we have a checklist of on our website, and it's posted. It's linked in the fall reopening plan of different things that you should look for in a progress monitoring tool, whether it's something you're creating on your own or trying to, if you actually have the money to purchase something. We also recommend making use of the NYSESLAT resources that are on Engage New York, the TOMS, the sample questions, which actually I think those might be on the OSA NYSED page, just to make things more confusing. But it gives you all kinds of information on the thinking that we did when we wrote the NYSESLAT. So if you're trying to create your own smaller interim assessment to get a sense of where the students are, these would be helpful things. Those are all linked in the plan. They're all on our website. Carmen can help you find them if you need as well. And I think there's just nothing. I think what's very important is that we really try to learn where our students are now and meet them where they need, even though officially their performance level is the same as it was at the beginning of last year.
I'm so grateful for you to bring up this data-driven instruction. And I know with the NYSESLAT, typically we would be gearing up to do that. But you brought up the progress monitoring piece, and I know our RBERN is doing a virtual session on that tomorrow, actually. Oh. And I know that the Hudson Valley RBERN actually collaborated with us to put together some of those components and resources, including the TOMS, the targets of measure you mentioned as well. Yeah. So thank you so much. That's right in line with where our heads are at. And I think we'll move on to Mr. Mumper. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you. I want to echo or pick up where Ross left off in a sense. So if the question is, it's a normal school year, it's a non-COVID circumstance, how do we support ELLs? Or if you're new to the field, and you have ELLs in the school, what do we do? So Ross explains, and I think it's really crucial, where are the students? If they're ELLs, then that means that in some sense, there is some particular attention to the English language and the way that we're teaching it, and where the student is with respect to that. And then I would add, since Ross I think covered the sort of monitoring and sort of where students are linguistically, who are the students? So if there's kind of a twofold process in the beginning of the school year, where are my students academically in terms of the, the hard skills that we're looking at, and who are the students as individuals and as people. And I think about this especially, as a parent of a 10-year-old, 10-year-olds, kids in that transitional and getting into middle school are now also defining who they are. So under non-COVID circumstances, we're trying to figure out, what are our students' linguistic skills and who are they? What kind of learner are they? What is their family like? What is their home life like? And so, if we're transitioning now into, well, what is it like when we close the screen or when they log out of Zoom? What are they looking at? What kind of literature? What kind of literary household are they? And I mean what, not if, because one of the most important things that I would say here is every single student that you have, L or not, has some linguistic assets, and they're fabulous. So if it's an L who we refer to as a newcomer, they are likely fluent in another language, and so it may be that is the most crucial asset that they have on day one of school. So does the teacher speak Spanish or the home language of the student? Maybe not. But that's actually the most crucial asset for the educator to realize that this is going to be the entry point for the student. So, and I think that goes for whether we're in COVID, we're remote, or we're hybrid. So I really want to stress that, yes, we need to know where the students are academically and who they are as a scholar, and also what are their individual and unique identities in terms of the way they use language, the way that they learn, and the way that they interact. And I think that goes for any time of year. And so the question now, and I guess these are the questions we'll get to next in the conversation, is how do you do that if a student is on Zoom like we are, right? And that's a really important question. And it's not a question that has, I don't know what to do. It actually has some pretty significant answers. And luckily, some of us here at the RBERN you're constantly in and out of schools and classrooms and talking to teachers, even virtually. So we do have some great ideas, and we have seen some fabulous success and some opportunities that you wouldn't have if we were all together in a classroom to learn what is that quiet, shy, reserved, but super focused student thinking and doing at this moment. Well, now we have some tools to kind of unpack that, which I think is kind of exciting.
Excellent. Thank you. And David, you're speaking to me about the whole child, and the data is definitely important, but a child is not just a number on a page. So these are all important components, and it just loops me back to what Dr. Cruz said about social emotional learning and ensuring that you have the students' needs in mind. Thank you so much. So I think we'll move on to question 2. With the recent challenges related to COVID-19 and remote learning, what do educators and parents need to keep in mind to best support the success of ELLs? So let's answer part A first, maybe educators. What should educators keep in mind? And then we'll loop back to parents. So let's start with Mr. Garmil this time.
I mean, I want to kind of emphasize before getting too deep into it that everything that we said in the last answer, first of all, it's part of it, it's all important, and I think it's for educators. I think a lot of what David was saying and a lot of what Gladys was saying about what is the student's state of mind. Are they ready to learn? Are they going to be able to engage? But I think also when you're talking about remote learning, especially, what's their technical capabilities, both how comfortable are they with it, and what is their situation like at home? Do they have a good machine they can use? Is that something that that the school can provide? If not, do they have the Wi-Fi that they need? And are they comfortable being in this type of Brady Bunch environment?
Thank you very much. And Mr. Mumper.
Great. Ross, I love this, the Brady Bunch environment. But yeah, I don't know that we ever thought there'd be 100 people in the household, which which it looks like we've got here. So yeah, if we stick to the first, sub part of the question, what do educators need to keep in mind? I'm going to lead here with some feedback from my son, who's 15, and so he's experiencing this in real time, like I'm sure some of you and your own children. I wrote down his notes, so I'm going to quote him here. His name is Davion Roberto. Dad, teachers can't possibly expect the same students to achieve at the same level with the same grades. Also, office hours are much more important than they used to be. Outside the box opportunities to figure out what's going on. Because I consider myself a good student, and that 40-minute block goes by so fast. End quote. So that was my little action research with my 15-year-old. And so I'll highlight two parts of that I think are important. Yes, we can't expect the same students to perform in the same way that we can't expect every assessment to be completed in the same way. You've probably all heard the interesting, research about how students solve a problem in 100 ways when they're very young, and then as we get older, we limit our ability to problem solve. Well, I don't take such a sour view of our creativity as we get older, as I get older, and all of us here. But there's something to be said there that when you constrain things or you change the learning environment, things are very different. So you might think, well, ELLs are going to be at a real disadvantage here, right? Because it's all through this Zoom, or it's a hybrid situation with less contact. But in fact, there's probably many cases in which ELLs are going to soar because they have a whole nother way to think about wait time. So I have a prompt. Well, I might have until midnight before I go to bed if I'm a high school kid to figure out that prompt. To do what a lot of our ELLs are always doing, right? Which is translating once, twice, maybe a third time, back and forth from modalities. It's an incredible opportunity that they just didn't have when everything was somewhat more high stakes in the classroom. So educators should know that there's an opportunity here, and if a student has the time, you're going to want to take advantage of that. And to put it in sort of TESOL language, we've got 4 modalities. You would think that Zoom is the talking and listening, but what about all those other modalities that student can use at the same time? In other words, reading and writing in real time as they're doing it. So educators need to know that's a real opportunity and they can take advantage of it. And then the other thing that I'd like to say is a sort of piece of action research over the last, 6 or 7 months during our quarantine and now remote learning, is that I think all teachers, this doesn't just go for, E&L contexts, really need to step up and think carefully about how we write and give instructions. And I consider myself a learner in this sense too. I know that as a professor, as a teacher, as a high school teacher, I have a certain way of doing things in a room verbally and orally. And it's very different when students are at home. And now especially, and here's where I think it's really important for our ELLs, what you write down is really what matters here, right? Things happen so quickly in real time in the Zoom context or WebEx context, and it may just not register for a student. And so the way that we write, whether, we bullet it, we think about our sentences, we use subordinate clauses, this stuff all matters far more than it ever did. So it sounds like a little tiny point, but I want to really reiterate that teachers as writers, right, as instructors who will be writing things out for their students, and if they're not, really they should, because it's crucial for our ELLs, it's really an important thing to know, because I guess I've seen so many left turns that could have kept going if the teacher had been writing in a way that was accessible to students. And that doesn't just mean, writing in the right language, but really addressing the instruction through the way that we write and post. Because if there's one advantage, again, that ELLs will have that we didn't have before, it's that I can log in and take an hour to digest this assignment that I used to have to figure out in a 3-minute mini lesson with something on the board. So it's both a challenge and an opportunity I'd highlight there.
Thank you. And Dr. Cruz.
So I'm going to start with the union of the two. So, during these past 6 months, it's been very clear that educators and parents need to be partners in education for all students, but very important for our ELLs. We all know that, you know, David just said that you could be letting in 100 people into your homes. And that's what happened, right? The children let the educators into their homes, and the educators let the children into their homes. But there were a lot of great things that happened as a result. Educators were able to make connections and relationships with parents like never before. They got to meet the entire family, the pets, and, you know, connect with them. And that, I believe, helps with lowering the filters of our English language learners, because now it's, you know, so you know my mom, you know my family, you know, it's become a collective, and we're in this all together, and we're going through this together. And those connections that the educators were able to foment with the parents and the families, we need to continue to build on. So I want to, any parents out there, thank you. And educators, thank you for opening your homes to our families. You know, I want to continue to say the social and emotional is very important in the technological world, and what we're doing using more of these online environments, we need to make sure that children have access. And sometimes, you know, if you miss a child in a Zoom or a WebEx or a Google Meet, what was it that the child wasn't there? Was it due to the fact that they didn't have internet access at that time? Because it does happen. Was it that there were 3 children in the home with 1 device? So it's important to know all of that information so that we can ensure that we're helping our ELLs be successful. And then when you get to the academic, I always like to emphasize the importance of ensuring that you're dealing with both the language objectives and the academic objectives. And what a better way to learn a language, I've always said, than using the academic language to learn. So those are some things I just would add.
Excellent. And it makes sense that the 2 conversations about educators and parents, because parents are most likely the first educators of those students. So as far as parents go, I mean, Dr. Cruz, you kind of answered both, but if you have anything to add on specifically that parents should be thinking of right now, you are welcome.
So, and then, you know, something else that is very important is that it's okay to speak your native language. When I brought my children here, I remember a teacher telling me, speak to your children in English. You have such a good command of English. And they knew I spoke in Spanish at home. So, you know, I think it's important, you know, as that partnership to respect that language, that home language, because the research is very clear. The stronger your native language, the better it is to learn a second language. So parents, speak that native language, write and read in that native language. I encourage that all the time. And when you're invited to now a Zoom or you're invited to a meeting, please go out. You know, some cultures don't leave the school to the educators, but it's important for us as parents to be involved. And now as partners, I mean, I think we've surpassed parent involvement and parent engagement. We are partners in education. So I just want to push that's the way it should be, and we have to continue to build on it.
Thank you so much. And let's go back to Mumper about the parents. What should they keep in mind?
Yeah, again, I just here, I'll echo Dr. Cruz. well, so obviously Gladys knows this, many of us here on this meeting know this, but how do we communicate to our parents that one of the most important things that they might be able to do is to talk about anything to do with school or academics in the language that works for them? And so that's really kind of a dual question about parents and educators and partnerships, which really may be at the core of all this here, right? So as she said, yeah, we're going beyond partnerships, but that requires some teaching. And so I'll just, suggest using a model of a district in our region here in the Hudson Valley that decided to use some of their time over the summer to run extensive parent courses that were in concert and in connection and in partnership with the parents and the ENL program, and then anyone else in the school who just wanted to be involved, including in this case, the assistant principal. And they just ran a series of courses and they said, this is what we're going to do with our summertime. We don't have summer school. And I think it was probably one of the most important things they could have done. And so they just happened to hit the nail on the head here. So what did they do? Well, they ran a fully bilingual Spanish-English course, kind of back and forth, a little translanguaging, but sometimes it was just led in Spanish. And they talked about academics and what it means to support students. And some of those parents knew they weren't going to be home all day. They weren't going to be able to sit with their student all day. And so it was almost like a crash course in Education 101. How do I support my ELL student? Other parents were invited, but it was an ENL program. That's something for educators to keep in mind on this call, and for parents too. How do you explicitly, right? If we talk about explicit instruction, how do we explicitly let parents know how to do it? As Gladys mentioned, there may be some cultural forces that suggest that school should be left to the school. And that's obviously a valid viewpoint, but in this circumstance, we're going to need as much language as we can. Another thing that parents should keep in mind that my wife said I should comment on, you can tell who runs my show here, right? The kids and my wife, etc. I'll quote her: breaking bread, eating together, and getting outside. I think that we're incredibly busy, and we realized at one point that we were all sitting in our little quadrants of the home on the screen. And she realized that we all needed, the kids needed to eat and to go outside. And I would add one more thing. So we talk about school and parent partnerships, but I think now more than ever, all of the other stakeholders are going to be crucial. So that means the universities who are sending student teachers into the classroom to more or less, let's call it co-teaching for now. Where are people eating? And if they're not eating, where are those food services coming from? What does a community school look like in this hybrid or virtual environment? So we have a list, and we try and promote and encourage these kind of partnerships in our region. But I would urge all of you on this call to just think about who are all the stakeholders that have a say in your student's life. From the YMCA to the food pantry to the ESL classes at night to the GED, to the kind of event like I described at the school district. They said, wait a minute, we're the teachers. If we want to reach these students, the best way is going to be through our parents. So I would think about this kind of triangulation between school, the community organizations and other institutions, and then the families as probably being more crucial than ever during this period.
Thank you. And Mr. Garmil, what about parents?
Parents, well, for all students, they just have to keep in mind that your kids are stressed. You're stressed. This is hard on everyone. And people need to take breaks. And I mean, I think that's something also for educators to keep in mind as well, is just remote learning cannot happen in the same length block as it does in the classroom without some breaks, without mixing things up for people. But for the parents, I think it's very easy to kind of, as David said, we're all busy, and to focus on your own thing and not want to put things aside for a minute, or it can be hard to put things aside, I should say, for a minute. But the kids need it, and and to take those breaks, whether as inside or as and just make sure that that you understand, that they understand we see how difficult it is, and we see what they're doing and what they're learning and how hard they're working. For specifically parents of ELLs, and I'm thinking a lot of the ones that maybe not be comfortable with English, with their own English skills so much, I think one thing they need to keep in mind that it is their right to be involved in their children's education. That they need, if they feel that they're not getting the information that they need and the language that they need it, if they feel that it's hard for them to speak with the administrators or teachers in their school, that they can stand up and demand it. We have resources, the RBERN parents, the parent hotline, and other places that people can turn to get help they need and get information that they need. But I'm always really worried that some parents may kind of shy away and just feel that if it's hard for them to participate, it must not be intended for them as well. And that is absolutely not the case. And that if they, I think it's got to be impressed on them that they know their children better than anybody. We want them to advocate for their children. We want them to be involved. And if we're not doing what we need to allow them to be involved, then we have to hear it so we can change.
Thank you so much, and thank you for mentioning our colleagues at the statewide language RBERN as well. I was about to put that in the chat, but I'll do that following this question. So what are some positive takeaways that ELLs can use moving forward from the pandemic? So this might include technology use, any advocacy skills, or anything else you can think of. And Mr. Mumper, I don't think we started with you yet. So how about we go you first?
Sure. Earlier in the conversation, we talked a little about the emotional experience, the trauma we're experiencing, but without overemphasizing the fact that this is actually traumatic for many of us, certainly for my family, and then shifting that language less towards pathologizing and more just towards sort of how do we use this in education. I would propose us to think about things as authentic learning. And so if there's, again, an opportunity here, it's that historically, many of our ELLs, and particularly more recently here in New York, certainly in the Hudson Valley, are coming from contexts, economies, political situations, ecological situations that are very traumatic and are really challenging. And so, as with any immigration experience, there's the danger when you come into this well-established institution with the large white columns that you're an outsider and that you're marginalized in some way, right? Not on purpose, but merely because this is a cultural fact, right? But instead, now we have a situation where, at least if we're here in New York, we're all experiencing something together. And so I bring that up not to say that we all need to experience it as a terrible trauma that we'll never get over, but quite the opposite. We're all experiencing something very authentic. And those of us who have a view of human nature as somewhat challenging and somewhat painful sometimes, here's an opportunity to do authentic learning. And I mean authentic in the biggest way. So I'll make one point that kind of touches on an earlier question, which is that teachers, if you're here, or educators, this is the best time to do action research right now that no one has ever done. Nobody has ever had this experience. So it's really like you're on the forefront of any observations about what works or how this technology is working, or, oh, look at this opportunity for a student to translate in a way that they couldn't have before. That's really exciting. So, it just breaks my heart when I hear lessons, cycles of learning that seem so disconnected from the moment that you just see students start to sink away. So I urge you then, I guess, to summarize all that, to think about how to make this as authentic as possible. So if you're talking about language or using the dichotomy of language and academic language, as Dr. Cruz just explained, how do we use those forms of learning and those forms of language to think about the moment that we're in? because this is an opportunity to be inclusive of other languages, of other cultures, of other experiences in a moment that we're all having together. And in a sense, that's incredibly equalizing and radically transformative for all students to have something as powerful as this. So while we acknowledge that socially and emotionally it can be challenging and it can be traumatic, it's also where we're at. It is what it is. And so this is an opportunity to take lessons and recraft them in a way that are really right now, in this moment, and what I'm doing online and what my friend is doing in this quadrant of the Brady Bunch, and these guys over here. It's all very real and it's all very transpiring right now. So that's a real opportunity. One other positive takeaway I wanted to highlight, we talked about again, is this opportunity to really, really use your linguistic and cultural skills, whether that's another language, whether that's being multilingual, to its full advantage. So it may not be that on a Zoom call like this that the teacher can run the class fully bilingually, but it does mean that that teacher now has an opportunity to say, you can attack this problem with all of your linguistic resources. And then at some point when we come back, we have a conversation in this context. And so I want to pull in a question that came in the chat from Jose Melendez. What about students in bilingual programs? I would say really two things. First, the same thing that I just said, which is that no other time is it as important as it is now to have students be able to soar and to use those capacities that they already have. And for what it's worth, I'd like to say that probably the most important thing that students could have right now is a bilingual program. So that's an advocacy question and a question of, models in schools and what is in the Capital Region and what's in the Hudson Valley. But I can think of no better situation for a student to be in right now than not to have to constantly have to be in this monolingual linguistic production environment. So even if it's not formally a bilingual class, if it's ENL, if it's English, if it's whatever else it is, recognizing and highlighting and promoting and encouraging that multilingual use is going to be crucial for every student. And if they're in a bilingual program, then everything that we've just said, I think, goes. The lesson should be authentic. Attacking it in English and Chinese should be authentic. Those languages don't discriminate against what's boring and what's not. And as difficult as this is, it's not a boring moment. It might seem like it's boring to be at home, but it's really not. Having two kids in this context, I can tell you, there's nothing boring about it at all. It's very challenging, but it's also very exciting. So I guess I would leave that comment with all of these linguistic resources are crucial. All of these cultural resources are crucial. And if we can bring them to bear on the authentic experience that we're having together, collectively, we know that learning is collective, learning is communal, and learning is social. It's probably part of the secret sauce or whatever it looks like, right? That guides the question today, which is how can we support multilingual learners?
Thank you so much. And Dr. Cruz, positive takeaways for ELLs.
So I guess, one of the positive takeaways for ELLs or for all of our students, families, is the fact that we have been exposed to so much. Our educators pivoted very quickly to remote learning. And with that, they became very resourceful and creative, and they found a lot of resources that out there that now are easier to access. So there's a lot of resources that have been out there, but we weren't using because we didn't have the real need. And the fact that we have had to depend on technology is incredible. For many decades, we've been trying to figure out how we can best integrate technology into our classrooms, into our classes. And this pandemic has forced us. It is what we need to do. So we've been able to learn about a lot of tools that are available and accessible to us. And it's just, there's so much out there, Dr. Lane started talking about all the resources that UAlbany has put together. The RBERNs statewide have put a myriad of resources together. Everywhere you go, all the BOCES, there are so many resources out there waiting for us to just use them. And then there's so many resources that benefit our ELLs, you know, the books that the children can hear, you know, that technology automatically can read to them. The many bilingual resources that are available. So, you know, it has been very hard, but it has really opened our eyes to the many resources that are out there that can enrich the lives of our children.
Thank you. And Mr. Garmil.
Oh, what else more is there to say after both of those? It's I think the technology is key. I think the idea of flexible adaptability. I think there's an enormous amount of skills being built by all of our students, whether they realize it or not, in being able to very quickly, not just shifting from the classroom to remote learning, but shifting from one resource to another, or one teacher prefers Google Classroom and another creates Prezis, or maybe you need to create your own presentations as well. And I know they've been getting a lot of this already from watching my own kids just in the classroom, far beyond anything I had ever done, beyond things that ever existed when I was in school myself. But I think that the resilience that they are building, that they have themselves, I'm hopeful that it's something that they are aware of. And I think one thing that our schools and our educators could try to do is help our students reflect on their own situation, on their own learning, and really try to understand why they're doing what they're doing in the classroom, and kind of become the more critical thinking, empowered learners that would be help them be lifelong learners beyond just students. And like everyone else in the country right now, I hope they're also learning that science matters.
Thank you. All right, question 4. How can schools, professionals, and parents work together to support ELLs? Now, I know we're coming to the end. We have about 9 minutes left, and I know that we touched on parents. So for our panelists, if we can just have a brief summary of how you think parents and school professionals can work together to support our English language learners. And I think we're back to Dr. Cruz to start.
Okay, so, you know, I've talked about how important it is to develop those relationships with your parents and families. I think that, you know, the fact that we now can use technology and connect with our families is, I wish I had it when I was a teacher. I was there developing tapes, cassettes to send to my families so they can practice with the children, so they could learn English in Puerto Rico and Spanish in New York. I did it in both places. So, you know, just the fact that you can bring parents together and give them a little brief how-to, I think that to me is like, I just wish I had it when I was teaching, because I would have had a great time with it. You know, we have access to our families and parents, so let's use that. Let's give them little how to help your child with vocabulary, how to help your child with literacy. Read and read. It doesn't matter what language, you know. So I'm going to leave it at that. I just the opportunities, it just excites me, the things that you can do.
Excellent. And Mr. Garmil.
I'd say check-ins as much as possible, and I don't really know how to resolve this because as a parent, the email is overwhelming. From just having 5 teachers for 2 kids last year, I didn't know what to do with it, and I can only imagine what it's like for the teachers hearing back from 25, 30 parents on all of the issues as well. So I think that's something that I would like to see us try to work on this year is what methods can we really develop to keep those lines of communications open without overwhelming people.
I agree with you, and that established communication as we went to remote learning in March was so crucial to maintain that level of connection and also continue learning in March. So I think we're taking those lessons learned and moving forward with that. Thank you, Ross. And Mr. Mumper, please.
Yeah, I think Ross and Gladys, I think you nailed it. I would just summarize by saying, how do we operationalize the parent relationship, right? And the answer can't be yet more emails, even though that's probably part of it, right? But it also just can't be a checklist. It certainly can't be an English-only checklist for our ENL families. So I don't know that I have an answer to that so much as I think we've asked the right questions. How do we operationalize that? And the only answer I can give that works is the examples in the school districts that I've seen over these past few months, who hit the phone, who call, who invite parents in for dinner, who decide that this is going to be a safe, socially distant way to convene. And they inject an incredibly human component to this, very different than the text message to download the link to the list of school supplies. So it's not something we're used to doing, but I think it's really necessary, because we know that explicit instruction works. And how do we teach the things that Gladys was describing, right? How do we teach how to be a reading family, how to talk about literature? We have to show it and model it, and that means we need to connect.
Well said. Thank you. And lastly, what resources are available to support ELLs and their families? And I know in our region, especially, a lot of times the ENL teacher, if you are on your own in a district, you are a hero because sometimes you feel like the only resource to support ELLs and families, but we are all teachers of ELLs, all educators of all subjects, all principals, all leaders. We're here to support ELLs too. So what other resources would you recommend or are available to support ELLs and families? Let's start with Mr. Garmil. What resources?
You know, your RBERNs, your NISABEs, your teacher groups, the RBERN, like we're all here to listen and support. And we are, at the beginning of the pandemic, we all found, did our best to find every resource we could and put information out about there. And we're still trying to constantly update it to say what might still be free or not. And how do we, very few, unfortunately, but how do we move things forward and, don't try to create it yourself, because we're here doing that work for you.
Thank you. And back to Mr. Mumper, and we'll wrap up with Dr. Cruz.
I placed one link in the chat that you can click on at your convenience, just because it happened to be something that that was put together at SED recently. It's a guide to community-based organizations for immigrants. It's not necessarily for parents and education, but it's a really crucial list if you're looking for a place to start. It's broken down by region, and the RBERNs and many other of our stakeholders contributed to these, so they're in some cases fairly exhaustive, and there's a lot of really helpful stuff in there. Other than that, I gotta say, we need to really be up to date on technology. If we're learning about Zoom and we're learning about WebEx, the first thing on your checklist needs to be WhatsApp. as a sort of honorary and now, you know, in-law member of a large immigrant family, we don't reach anybody by phone. We reach everybody by WhatsApp, and that's probably going to be the case with your immigrant families. So if your school hasn't already figured that out, then you're basically missing out on ways to communicate and do the very things that Ross and Gladys were describing. So it's not a resource, but it's really a question of the conduit that we use to connect.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Cruz, take us home.
So you've talked about, you know, resources available on the New York State Education Department, Office of Bilingual and World Languages. You've talked about institutions of higher ed. You know, we opened with some great resources that are available at the University at Albany. And your community, right? There's still a lot of things in your community. Stay connected to your community and your school. When, you know, your school has a lot of access to a lot of resources. You know, in our region, we bring together all of the partners, mental health, and everyone that's serving our children in our 3 counties. We bring the departments of health. We bring everybody together, and those are all resources that are available to you, to everyone. So, but the school is a great first place to go. So I want to just leave it at that.
Thank you so much, all of our panelists. I see some great questions in the chat. I'll refer to Dr. Rivera-Wilson to see if we have some time for some questions.
Yes, we do have time for questions, and if you want to select them, Carmen, based on the time that we have remaining. And I put out a question in the chat about future sessions related to ENL. If individuals have a particular area that they would like to learn more about, I asked them to please place that information in the chat section.
Excellent. And I see some great questions in the chat related to some of the things we're doing at RBERNs across the state. But I'll open it up to panelists ahead of time, just if you would like to jump in with some answers. There's a question about how will teachers reach mandated minutes with students only being there 4 days or other day remote only? So anyone want to comment on this one?
Well, I was actually trying to type something in, but it wasn't coming out well. First thing I'd say is to look to the NYSED reopening guidance, the large document we put out in July. We have a definition in there of how to measure equivalence for the time, and it's something, so it does not all have to be seat time in the classroom. It is engaged learning time with a that is in some way teacher-led or teacher-assessed. I don't have it as good as I can on the tip of my tongue, but essentially it is. Thank you, pages 97, 98. But it is not all FaceTime with the teacher for measurement.
Yes, and I will say, I know these off the top of my head now because these are the conversations we have in our regional leader meetings. So if anybody on the call right now would like to participate in those, please reach out to your local RBERN. We've got lots of great conversations. There was a weekly chat that Hudson Valley RBERN had even throughout the pandemic, addressing concerns and questions such as these. So great questions. Excellent. And thank you to Dr. Cruz for joining us. We've got some time constraints too. Any other comments on this question? Bye, see you later.
I guess I'd make a general comment. The RBERNs are amazing. You know, I'm not biased at all, but these are the kind of questions that in some cases really require a granular level of detail, and we're happy to walk through. And as Carmen mentioned, both our RBERNs are essentially available. Emails are out there. I'll put ours in the chat. Actually, we kind of keep an RBERN-wide email, and then we funnel them towards the specialist who might know more or just wants to answer that question. All of these things are up for discussion, and we're happy to partner with you or think about what works for your district.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Suzanne. I see you in the chat there. Okay. Dr. Rivera-Wilson, would you like to wrap us up?
Yes, I want to thank you all for joining us today at Community Conversations. This was a wonderful session. It was rich with information. I know that everyone wants access to the chat section, and I will make that available to all of the participants. A copy of this session will be available on remoteed.org. And it is very clear to me that we need to continue this conversation. So I will have a conversation with Carmen about other sessions in the near future that will continue this conversation about specifically related to ENL and how we can better assist students and parents. So I want to thank today's presenters and again, all of those who attended, and I wish you well and good health. Until next week, good night.